So, our topic this afternoon is all about common characteristics of developing countries. So, unsa may mga characteristics or ti mailhan nato for us to distinguish nga kana nga country is usa siya ka developing country. So, there are 7 talking points that we are going to tackle this afternoon. First, we have low levels of living. Second is low productivity. Third is high population growth and dependency burden. And fourth is high and rising levels of unemployment or underemployment. Fifth, we have dependence on agriculture and export of primary products. Sixth, we have imperfect markets. And lastly, dominance, dependence, and vulnerability in international relations. So kaning pito mo na ito ang i-discuss for the entire afternoon together with Ms. Krisha Ann Cotara and Ms. Crystal Jean Manila. So please bear with us for this afternoon. So before we formally start our discussion, these are the learning outcomes. So you are expected to explain the distinction between low levels of living and low per capita income. Second, discuss the reasons of high and rising levels of unemployment or underemployment. And lastly, explain the consequences of dominance, dependence, and vulnerability in international relations. So if natin gitawag nga developed country, nasa'y developing country. So what are these developing countries? So these are the countries with little industrial and economic activity and where people generally have low incomes. So from the word itself, developing, meaning dili pa kayo siya inga naka-develop, dili pa kayo siya inga naka-advance, and then if naman gani mga advancement nga ana nga nasod is dili pa kayo siya inga naka-prominent or dominant kumpara sa the mga developed na nga country. So little industrial meaning these countries heavily rely on either sa agriculture or sa mga manual nga labor nga manual labor nga pamagi sa workforce. And in terms sa economics sa ilahang particularly sa income nila, ang developing country is mubo ay not mubo, low ang ilahang income as well as ang income sa mga tao nga nagpuyo anang lugar is low sad. So we all know nga daghan tag mga timailahan for us to distinguish ang kana nga nasod isa sa siya ka developing country. So therefore, naay pito ka characteristics nga to ang i-consider in general na siya for us to know and to consider nga kana siya is usa ka developing country. So first is low levels of living. So low standards of living tend to be experienced by the majority of the population. So unsa may mga ilhanan na to for us to say nga low level ang living ana nga nasod. So one of the things that we need to consider for us to say nga low ang levels of living ana nga nasod is in terms sa iyahang per capita national income. So what is this per capita income? So this per capita income can be obtained by dividing the national income of a country by its population. Buti pa sabot, makuha nato si per capita income if i-divide nato ang national income nga ma-generate ana nga nasod over its population. And in the event gani nga mas dako pa ang size sa population kumpara sa income nga na-generate ana nga nasod, then that particularly means that that country has a low per capita income. Unsa may naa if kung low ang per capita income sa usa ka nasod? That having a low per capita income will definitely means nga ang kana nga nasod has low levels of living. And when that certain country has low levels of living, that can lead to conclusion nga that can lead to consideration nga usa na siya ka developing country. So, mo na reason nga nung gitapo na ho siya sa salient points, it's because these three are one of the things that we need to consider for us to say nga low levels of living ang naaana nga nasod. So, aside from low levels of per capita income, we also have here income gap between rich and poor as well as economic inequality. So, nganong na-exist maning duha? There are a lot of reasons, and one of it, and the most common and and dili siya bag-o para nato is the existence of technology. So in what way nga maka-create og gap or inequality ang technology? Let's say US and Philippines. So US is a developed country and the Philippines is a developing country. US has technology and Philippines also have a technology. But the thing that makes it different is ang technology nga nasa US is mas advanced and mas daghan kumpara sa Pilipinas. So, if ari sa ta mo focus sa US, since advanced man and daghan ang presence sa technology sa ilahang workforce, then that means nga ang pag-generate sad sa ilahang productivity rate is taasad, meaning taas og level ang ilang productivity rate. Tungod kay ba man ta nga if technology aided gani sa katrabaho, dali ra siya mahuman. Kumpara if kung magmano-mano or manual labor ang atong gamiton. So, if a country has high productivity rate, then that can highly or kanang mas dako siya og chance nga maka-generate og mas dako nga income. Ikumpara na to sa Pilipinas nga yes, naay technology, pero dili siya nga nakadaghan, dili siya nga naka-advance. So maka-generate man siya og productivity rate, pero dili siya ingana kadako nga dili maka-generate man gani siya og productivity rate, dili siya ingana kadaghan kumpara sa US. And if maka-generate man siya og income, dili gyapon siya ingana kadako kumpara sa US. So mao na nga naay gap tungod kay ang technology mao'y nagpapaspas sa income rate sa US ug nakapasakasad sa income rate sa Pilipinas pero dili lang jud mag-meet ang income sa duha tungod kay mas advanced man ang US kaysa sa Pilipinas. Mo na nga naagi gap ang duha. It's because of technology and some other factors nga pwede sad maka-affect nganong naay gap ang rich ug ang poor ug nganong naay inequality. We have here economic development cannot be measured solely in terms of the level and growth of overall income or income per capita. One must also look at how that income is distributed among the population at who benefits from development. So oftentimes, mingon ta dayon nga if dako ganig income nga na-generate nga nasod, develop na kanang asensado na nga nasod. But asensado na nga nasod. But as a person, we need to consider nga dili ra kana ang basihan. We also need to look at how that income is distributed to the people and who gain benefits from it. Okay, if kung ang income sa usa ka nasod dako, ang tanan naka-benefit ana, and then balance ang pagka-distribute sa income nga na-generate ang nasod towards its people, then ay pata makaingon nga well-developed gyud ay na nga nasod. Mao na nga nakabantay bitaw mo nga mas dako ang poverty rate sa developing country kaysa sa developed country tungod kay ang income nila naay income pero dili siya enough nga ma-distribute evenly sa tanan and dili tanan sad ang naka-benefit ana nga income. Mao na nga taas siya og productivity rate kumpara sa developed country nga dako sila og na-generate income. And aside sa dako sila na-generate income, halos tanan or majority of them gain benefit from that and even sad ang pagka-distribute ana niya. Second thing is the extent of poverty. So there are two factors to be considered. First is the average level of national income, and second is the degree of inequality in its distribution. So how to measure the extent of poverty? So before, nasa gitawag nga absolute poverty. So it meant to represent a specific minimum level of income needed to satisfy the basic physical needs of food, clothing, and shelter in order to ensure continuous survival. So buti pasabot na sila giset nga minimum level of income nga mo na i-meet dapat sa kada nasod. But then later on na-realize nila nga every country or even every region has different minimum level. And that's the reason why they come up with a recommendation nga gamiton ang International Poverty Line. So it is a standard poverty line for measuring poverty globally. So kaning International Poverty Line mao na ang gigamit para ma-measure kung unsa ang to measure the global poverty, and this helps to measure the number of people living in extreme poverty and helps compare kung unsa it helps compare the poverty level of every country. So let's say i-compare nato ang poverty level sa US o sa Philippines. So this international poverty line would be a great help. Third is health. So in countries with low levels of living, there are constant battles against malnutrition, disease, and ill health. And we also need to remember this one, that malnutrition and poor health in the developing world are even more a matter of poverty than of food production, even though the two factors are indirectly interrelated. Of course, poverty and food production are the great contributors towards malnutrition and poor health. But then, mas ni matter ang poverty in many reasons and in most cases. Let's say, for instance, um, gusto ka ay you wanted certain food, kay gutom ka. Of course, if kung mapalipas ka gutom, then that will certainly affect your health. So, gusto ka mo kaon ana na ay pagkaon, but you cannot afford to buy that one due to poverty. Wala kay kwarta nga ikapalit ana. So, with that scenario, makaingon na ta nga that's a matter of poverty and not it is more a matter of poverty than of food production. Another scenario is, let's say, in terms of sanitation. Gusto ka mopuyo og lugar in which healthy sa imuhang lawas. Let's say, hinlo, hapsay, dili gubot, dili saba. But then, due to poverty, dili nimo kaya mo afford, dili mo kaya mo afford o magtukod og balay or mopuyo sa usa ka lugar wherein makakita ka peace of mind, healthy nga kanang clean environment, clean surrounding. So, gustohon man nimo nga mo puyo adto nga klase sa environment, pero dili nimo mabuhat due to poverty, wala kay kapasidad nga mobuhat adto. And that certain scenario can directly affect your health. Okay, syempre 'di ba? Kisa may ma-healthy, kisa mang tawhana ang healthy nga nagpuyo og gubot nga lugar, saba kaayo og hugaw kaayo, 'di ba? And another thing is in terms of medical. Kintahay masakit ka and then you want to cure your illness, but due to poverty, dili nimo makaya nga mudong sa hospital tungod kay wala kay ika-sustain in terms of financial needs, like kintahay mo ba og tambal, kanang bayad sa doctor. So kanang naanaw ta kay chance nga maayo, pero dili nahingnoon ka maayo tungod kay wala kay kapasidad to do that one. Wala kay kwarta nga ika-afford para mapatambal, para mapalit sa tambal o mabayad sa doctor. That's why giingon ari nga malnutrition and poor health is more a matter of poverty, kay mas dako gyud ang role nga mas dako gyud ang impact nga nahatag sa poverty towards malnutrition and poor health. Next is education. So in a country with low levels of living, in terms of education, low levels of literacy ang naa nila. Taas or there are significant school dropout rates, and there are inadequate and often irrelevant educational curricula and facilities. So mo ni ang present sa usa ka nasod wherein ay low levels of living. So to sum up the first characteristics of the developing country, which is low levels of living, I have 6 points here. So first, low relative levels and in many countries, slow growth rates of national income. Second, low levels and in many countries, stagnating rates of real income per capita growth. Third, highly skewed patterns of income distribution, with the top 20% of the population receiving 5 to 10 times as much income as the bottom 40%. Fourth, consequently, great masses of third world population suffering from absolute poverty, with 1 billion to 1.3 billion people living on subsistence income of less than $370 per year. Fifth, large segments of the population suffering from ill health, malnutrition, and debilitating diseases, with infant mortality rates running as high as 10 times those in developed nations. And lastly, in education, low levels of literacy, significant school dropout rates, and inadequate and often irrelevant educational curricula and facilities. So second characteristics of a developing country is low productivity. So what are the causes ngano ang low ang productivity rate sa usa ka nasod? So first is low educational standards within the countries. So if ubos gani ang educational standards, so we can expect or assume nga ang kada nga nasod is dili siya ingana ka literate, and if kung ang usa ka nasod is dili ingana ka literate ang mga tao, then we can expect also nga in terms sa ilahang trabaho is dili sad ingana kanindot, dili ingana ka hapsay, and dili ingana ka kitang masatisfy gyud ang mga customers. So mo nang maubos gyud ang productivity rate nila, kay biskan pa og gustuhon nila nga mo-achieve og 100 kintahay ka pieces sa usa kitay ka product, pero dili man sila ingana ka knowledgeable enough, so dili gyapon nila ma-achieve ng high productivity rate. Second cause is low level of health among workers. There are really direct relationship between health and productivity, because how can somebody be productive if ang condition sa iyang lawas is dili ingana ka-active? Kay di ba miskan kita mismo if kung naatay gamunon like assignments or performance tasks, then lain natong lawas, di ba dili man taganahan mo lihok. So same thing with this. So if low sad ang level sa kanang health sa mga workers, then dili sad sila ingana ka-active, dili sad sila ingana ka-ganado, dili sad sila ingana ka-productive. And then third cause is lack of investment in physical capital. Of course, ang mga physical equipments or tools are really a great help to achieve a certain goal. Kay kintahay gusto ka kintahay ang Pilipinas gusto magama og sakyanan. So how can they possibly make a certain vehicle if kung kuwang sila og mga equipment and tools, di ba? So that's why mo nang mubo, I mean not that mo nang low ang productivity rates is because kuwang ang kanang mga equipments or tools nga kinahanglanon. And lastly is lack of access to technology. So as what I have said earlier nga kanang between US and the Philippines nga ang technology dako gyud siyang tabang in terms of productivity rate, kay once gani ang usa ka trabaho is aided by technology, paspas ang iyahang workforce, then that certainly means nga taas sad iyahang productivity rate. Whereas if kung dili kayo technology savvy ang usa ka lugar, or kanang kuwang bitaw sila technology, or dili kayo sila ingana ka hanas sa paggamit sa mga technology, then we can expect nga low sa ilahang productivity rate, kay more on manual man. And I want to, before I gave the next topic to my co-reporter, I want you to remember this one. You can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make him drink. Why did I choose this certain quotation? Because this has a relation towards having a low productivity. So in our life, we have certain goals for us to be productive. But sometimes, for us to be productive, but we all know sad nga dili na to na siya ma-achieve without motivation and the necessary requirements for us to achieve that one. So same thing sa usa ka nasod, misken pa og na sila plano nga maasenso from developing countries to a developed country if kung magkuwang gihapon sila sa mga necessary requirements for them to develop, and ang mga tao sad is not willing enough to cooperate towards development, then dili gyapon possible ang pag-asenso. So that's why as a concerned citizen or even as a government official, if you wanted to create development or changes towards your country, then you need to have a plan wherein possible siya, and that plan you should make sure nga ma-achieve yun na siya dili kay taman ra sa plano. You need to work on that because that is the only thing for you nga ma-achieve ninyo na nga goal.
So good day everyone. I am Christine Jean S. Manila, second reporter for Group 4. So here are my topics. The first is the high population growth and dependency burden. Next is the high and rising levels of unemployment and underemployment. Last is the dependence on agriculture and export of primary products. So here are the objectives. At the end of the lesson, the students are expected to be able to see the advantages and disadvantages of high population growth. Next is to be able to know what are the causes of high and rising of unemployment. Last is to be able to know the current situation of our agricultural economy and to know the benefits of exporting products. So what is population growth? So population growth is the increase in the number of humans on Earth. For most of human history, our population size was relatively stable. But innovation and industrialization, energy, food, water, and medical care became more available and reliable. So, ang pagdako sa ato ang populasyon mao gid ang pagdaghan sa mga tao sa kalibutan. Unya sa atong pagdaghan mao gid nay makapalig-on natong tanan. Pero sa pagdaghan nato dili man sa nato malikayan nga daghan sad ang mausob. Og kini mao gyud isa po ni sa ay og kini tanan kasaligan gyud og daghan sa atoa ang nanginahanglan, especially the food, water, and the medical care. So what is causing population growth? So the primary and perhaps most obvious cause of population growth is an imbalance between birth and deaths. So makadungog magyutano nga mayon sila nga oy ning daghan na ang mga tao sa kalibutan kay nga na mas daghan pa ang mamatay, daghan pa ang gipanganak kaysa sa namatay. And yes, that is true. Next is, what are the disadvantages of high population growth? So as we expected, the population growth also leads to negative impacts on the environment and to our economic, such as environmental degradation. So kani, for example, is the cutting trees. So sige tag-cut og trees kay mag-make taog kanang mga nindot kay nga bay. So mogamit man kitang materials na like especially the tree. So, ang atoa is, sige tag-cut og trees without replacing it. And, ang isa maapektuhan og tama na ang animals pod. So, like the birds, they can no longer find a shelter because wala man taga-replace og trees nga atong giputol. So, next is the waterways. Kini is, dili pud kumutanan, pero mostly nga, mostly is kanana ay gamiton nato ang tubig in a irresponsible way. Sayang kaayo imbis nga naay mas nanginahanglan pero ato ang giusik-usikan. So mo sa isa na siya sa mga disadvantages pod. Next is the global warming. Kani siya is example is the burning plastics and too many cars. Sige tag burn sa kadaghan natong mga tao, di man siya malikhayan nga gahi siya putag magkuanta, magdaob ta. So sa ginagmay na itong pagdaob, ug kana tanan itipo na tako dyan na o kanang, it can cause a global warming. And also, too many cars, overpopulated po ang ato ang hangin, di ba? Next is the exploitation of natural resources. So also the fishing, like kung giyon ako nimo nga cutting trees, kana siya. Also mo na siya mga mahimong resulta. And next is the unemployment. Yes, this is very common jud. Too many people ba nga na is loss of opportunities to find a job. Next is the food shortage. So if wala kay trabaho, maglisod kag pangita og pagkaon. O di ba? O kikita ba yan nag-eskwela ta kay para magkatrabaho ta para nata ikapalit nata ka-provide sa ato ang mga needs. So next is the last is the poverty. So poverty kay wala naman tay trabaho na sa kadaghan sa mga tao, the government cannot manage it well na kay sobra kadaghan nato. Di siya malikihan nga poverty will exist. So despite of having a lot of disadvantages of high population growth, there is also advantages on it. So there are 5 advantages that we can get from high population growth. So first is the more people leads to greater human capital. So kini siya, there are many factors behind this, but the world's growing population means we have a bigger pool of human capital, and the possibility of this cutting edge discoveries increase. So magkadaghan ang tao, magkadaghan siya, the more siya nga mudako ang pundok sa kapital, and mas mudaghan pag ina siya og tama no. O syempre more rise na po ang population growth. Then next is the higher income growth. So higher income growth is a population growth will lead to economic growth with more people to produce more goods. It will lead to higher tax revenues that which can be spent on public goods such as healthcare and environmental projects. Next is the economies of scale. So farming and industry have been able to benefit from economies of scale, which means as the population grows, food output and manufacturing output have been able to grow even faster than the population growth. Next, the fourth one is the efficiency of higher population density. So this one is in terms of per capita carbon footprint, areas with a high population density are significantly more efficient than the rural areas and places with a low population. So mas nindot siya og daghan gid siya in terms of capita carbon footprint. So last one is the critical mass. So higher population can enable a critical mass of people to enable a cider, more vibrant society. With low population, there is also less scope for diversity. But when population grows, it can enable to support of a broader cultural range of activities. So, dependency burden. So dependency ratio measures the burden caused by non-working people on a nation's working age population. The higher the dependency ratio, the greater burden. So kaning dependency ratio mo ni siya ang magsukod sa pasununon sa kanang mga tao bitaw nga wala gatrabaho or walay trabaho. So the more nga taas ni siya og kanang ang rate or taas ni siya og kanang ratio mo na siya nga mas dako ang pasununon, burden kaayo siya. So next is how does dependency burden affect population growth? So a higher dependency ratio is likely to reduce productivity growth. A growth in the non-productive population will diminish product capacity and could lead to a lower long-run rate of economic growth. So the more nga daghan ang tao nga walay trabaho or wala ga trabaho, maminusan gyud ang paglago sa atong productive capacity, and it can cause low rate sa trading sa economy. So how does the employment affects everybody? The national unemployment rate is defined as the percentage of unemployed workers in the total labor force. It is widely recognized as a key indicator of the performance of a country's labor market. So why did unemployment rate matters? So according to the US Bureau of Labor, or the BLS, when workers are unemployed, their families lose wages and the nation as whole loses their contribution to the economy in the terms of the goods, services that could have been produced. So what are the causes of unemployment? So there are 5 causes why there is a high level of unemployment. First is the fictional unemployment. This is unemployment caused by the time people take to move between jobs. E.g. graduates or people changing jobs. There will always be some fictional unemployment in an economy because the information isn't perfect and it takes time to find work. 2 is structural unemployment. This occurs due to a mismatch of skills into the labor market. It can be caused by occupational mobilities. So the occupational mobilities this refers to difficulties in learning new skills applicable to a new industry and technology change, or unemployment farmer may struggle to find work in a high-tech industry. Next is the geographical immobilities. This refers to difficulty in moving regions to get a job. There may be jobs in London, but it could be difficult to find suitable accommodation or schooling for their children. Next is the technological change. So if there is the development of labor or labor saving technology in some industries, then there will be a fall in demand for some types of labor which have been replaced by machines. Next is the structural changes in the economy. The decline of the coal mines due to lack of competitiveness meant that many coal miners were unemployed. However, they found it difficult to get jobs in a new industry such as computers. So number 3 is the classical or real wage unemployment. This occurs when wages in a competitive market are pushed above the equilibrium at the supply of labor is greater than the demand for labor, leading for unemployment. Also, wages could be pushed above the equilibrium level by minimum wages or trades unions. This is sometimes known as the equilibrium unemployment. 4 is the voluntary unemployment. So this occurs when people choose to remain unemployed rather than take jobs available. So for example, if benefits are generous, people may refer to stay on benefits rather than to get work. So this is the number 4 kay mo ni siya ang most common good nga why there are a lot of Filipinos na walay kanang trabaho kay di ba sa ubang nasod is kanang butongtong na gani kag 18 years old, you need to find kanang a job kay ikaw na mubuhi sa imong kagalingon, you have your own apartment na or kanang kondo kay kani magbuhis mo kagalingon, mahimo na kang independent. More dili sa atoa bisan pa og mga 30 ka pinata pero naagya punta sa ato ang ginikanan kay mao may nato ang culture bitamoy na anda nato. Og isa pod og feel nato nga daw katag benepisyo ani nga di lang ta mo trabaho di pa ta mahagho nga nakakaon bitaw ko. Mo na nga di na lang pud mo grab og opportunity mangitag kanang trabaho kay na naman may mubuhi niya na magsalig naman. So next, number 5, the last one is the demand, or also the I, and number 4 is mo po ni siya pareha ni sila sa number 1, katong fictional unemployment. So last is the demand deficient or cyclical unemployment. So demand deficient unemployed occurs when the economy is below full capacity. So dependence on agriculture. So the Philippine economy is largely dependent on agriculture. It plays a significant role in the Philippine economy. It is considered the backbone of the Philippine economy because it employs about 40% of the Filipino workers. But unfortunately, it only contributes an average of 20% to the gross domestic product. Agriculture is the primary source of income for poor rural people and the only source for many of the poorest households. Most of them depend on subsistence, farming, and fishing for their livelihoods. Why is agriculture poor in the Philippines? Ngano di ay? So, here, Filipino agricultural workers remain among the poorest and most disadvantaged groups in our society. The high level of poverty among our farmers also makes them highly at risk for the effects of this crisis. So poverty among agricultural workers is mainly attributed to the lack enough attention to the cultural sector. However, agricultural sector has been beset with persistent challenges resulting in low farm incomes, low rural employment, lack of food security, and meager agricultural competitiveness. So why do Filipino farmers suffer man? So lack of agricultural support services, limited processing of raw produce, inefficient marketing, transport, shipping of farm products. So isa dyan ni siya kay kaning gasto bitaw, walay kuan pang pag-deliver pa sa mga products. Ang kuan pag-asa pa i-deliver, asa pa nimo ipaninda. Also mo na siya makapa suffer sa mga farmers. And also poor income of producer and shortage of local supply and high price for consumers. Dawa isa po na siya. And also the high cost of inputs, low price of palay, lack of capital, labor problem, lack of post-harvest facilities, pest and disease and irrigation system. So kaning mga farmers luoy pud kaayo ni sila kay mahal pa gani barato ang mga kuan, mga pang pesticides nga ipangbutang bitaw sa kuan ay kana bang mga abono nga ipangbukan sa ilang tanom, pero ini baligya barato kaayo. Unya usab pud kaning mga wala problema kayo kay mag-labor pa nya gamay ang ilang halimbaw dili mabawi ang ilang kapital luoy kaadyo. So bisan pag unsa man ka kalisod, but daapod tay mga ipagmalaki bitaw sa lain nga sa laing nasud kay dapat ba tay mga ipang-export sa nga mga products sa laing gawas. So there are mga natay mga ipang-export nga primary products. So the Philippine major exports are the first is the electronic, natay 42% ana nga export sa laing nasod, and that is the other manufacturers natay 10% ana, and the wood crafts and furniture natay 6%, and the bananas, the pineapple and pineapple products mo na siya mo usa po na sa mga main yung mga kanang pang export nga products. Also the mango, the shrimps, prawns and tuna. So what is good about exporting products? So exporting can also help boost your productivity because selling into larger markets creates economies of scale which helps to reduce cost and increases efficiency. Next is when exports are greater than imports, net exports are positive. Next is export is incredibly important to modern economies because they offer people and firms many more markets for their goods. Advantages of exporting product is that you could significantly expand your markets, leaving you less dependent on any single one. So di na ka magsalig sa lain. You can export your products without even relying to anyone. So thank you. That's all that's all. Thank you for your time.
I will discuss what is imperfect markets. So, imperfect markets refers to any economic market that does not meet the rigorous standards of the hypothetical perfectly or purely competitive market. In imperfect market, individual buyers and sellers can influence prices and production. There is no full disclosure of information about products and prices, and there are high barriers to entry or to exit in the market. So, ang imperfect markets giingon man diri nga there is no disclosure information about the products and the prices. So, word M, so dili kompleto ilang mga details about sa ilang mga products and prices. Wala sila kaugaling of manufacturers, dili parihas sa kanang perfect market. Ang perfect market kay unlimited buyers and sellers, naman sila unlimited buyers and sellers, na sila maka-substitute product sila. Buyers have complete information, na siya ang perfect market. But we tackle about the focus about the imperfect. Unsa man ang imperfect market? So, maula dito, there is no disclosure information about the products and prices. So, imperfect market also have prevalence and limited information about the developing countries. So, in developing countries, many of necessary factors that enable markets to work efficiently. They may lack also functioning banking system, which enables and encourage savings and investment. They may lack adequate infrastructure, especially in terms of goods in all types, which would enable raw materials, semi-finished products, and final goods around the country. So, they may lack developed legal system, which ensures the business takes place in the fair and structured manner. And last, they may lack accurate information system for both producers and consumers, which often leads to imperfect information, the misallocation of resources, and misinformed purchasing decision. Mauto siya ang mga prevalence of imperfect markets and limited information. So for now, I will discuss the four types of imperfect markets, which is monopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic competition, and last, monopsony and oligopsony. Unsa man ang monopolistic? Monopoly is a structure in which there is only one dominant seller. Products offered by this entity have no substitute, and there is market have high barriers to entry and a single seller who sets the prices on goods and services. Prices can change without notice to consumers. So, word mono usara gud no, usaray gada ani nga market. So, example kini among tindahan usaray kadala, usa wala siya lain nga partner or what. Then next is oligopoly. Unsa man poy kalahian ang oligopoly sa monopoly. Ang oligopoly is a structure that many buyers but few sellers. These few players in the market meaning bar others from entering. They may set prices together in the case of cartel. Only one takes the lead to determine the price for goods and services while the others follow. So ang oligopoly kuno kay daghan ang mamalitay pero gamay ra ang namaligyaan ang products. And also state that this is kanang for example na ang oligopoly daw kuno kay only one takes the lead to determine the price for goods and services while the others follow. So means ani ang isa katag-iya sa isa ka market, for example mo ingon siya og kani nga product pwede ba ni nga ato ni himuon siya og 70 pesos, for example nga product nga sabon kana siya ibaligan na nato og 70 pesos. So katong ubang market or tindahan kay mosunod ra pod atong iyang gihatag nga prices ato nga products. Silbi mosunod ra. So next is what is monopolistic competition. So word compete, mag-compete na siguro ang ilang prices ani. Magdepende na sa tag-iya, dili na sila magbase sa lain nga tindahan. So, in monopolistic competition, there are many sellers who offer similar products that can be substituted. Business compete with one another and are price makers, but their individual decision do not affect the other. So, mualag ito. Ang monopolistic competition daw kuno daghan ang namaligya pero lahi-lahi sila og prices. So nagkumpit na ilang price, magdepende na og kinsay unang mahalin or kinsa to ang kabaraton kay sa ato ara pa karon kay og kinsay barato mo ni ato palitan. Then dili ang ilang mga products dili gyud siya pwede i-substitute na sellers who offer similar products that can't be substituted. Una siya, then wala dito ang ilang prices mag-compute. What is monopsony and oligopsony? Unsa man pud kalahian ani? These structures have many sellers but few buyers. Daghan ang namaligya pero gamay ra ang mamalitay. In both cases, the buyer is the one who manipulates market prices by playing firms against one another. So lahi sa di ay pud ni monopsonyan o oligopsony kay sila ang ang customer may mag-control sa ilang prices sa isang market. Buyers is the one who manipulate. Sila ang manipulate sa prices sa isang products. So, last topic, talk about the dominance, dependence, and vulnerability in international relations. For many less developed countries, a significant factors contributing to the persistence of low levels of living, rising unemployment, and growing income inequality is the highly unequal distribution of economic and political power between rich and poor nations. So pasabot ani na ang mga ubos or less developed countries dili patas ang ekonomiya sa mga pobre og dato, meaning ana nga mas taas ang pagtagad sa mga dato kaysa sa mga pobre. As we shall see later, this unequal strength are manifested not only in the dominant power of rich nations to control the pattern of international trade, but also in their ability often to dictate the terms whereby technology, foreign aid, and private capital are transferred to the developed countries. Other equally important aspects of the international transfer process serve to inhibit the development of poor nations. One subtle but nonetheless significant factor contributing to the persistence of underdevelopment has been the transfer of first world values, which attitudes, institutions, and standards of behavior to the third world nations. Such attitude can be often breed corruption and economic plunder by privileged minority. Finally, the penetration of rich country attitude, values, and standard also contributes to a problem widely recognized and referred to as the international brain drain. So, what is international brain drain? It is a migration of professional and skilled personnel who were often educated in the developing country at great expense to the various developed nations. The net effect of all these factors is to create a situation of vulnerability among the third nations, in which forces largely outside their control can have decisive and dominating influences on their economic and social well-being. Many countries, most of the 42 less developed, certainly are small and their economies are dependent, with very little prospects for self-reliance. For third world nations that possess greater assets and relative more bargaining power, the phenomenon of dominance becomes manifested more in the general tendency of the rich to get richer, often at the expense of the poor. But as mentioned, this is not simply a matter of rich nations growing at faster pace than poor nations. It is also a matter of rich and dominating sectors of groups within the LDC economy. The modern and industrial or agricultural sector, landlords, trade unions, leaders, industrialists, politicians, bureaucrats, and civil servants in the position of power, growing richer, often the expense of the much larger but politically and economically power masses for a poor people. This dual process of rich nations and powerful groups within poor nations prospering while others stagnate is by no means an isolated phenomenon. We shall see that it is a rather common characteristic of international economic relations. So that's all, and I hope you understand. Thank you.